G'day, guys. Welcome to this week's Hash It Out. I'm CW, and once again joined by Armenio. How are you, mate?
Doing well, doing well.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good myself here. I actually remembered my name, so that's a good start.
So what's the
Um,
topic today? What do you
I
want to talk
think
about?
we should sort of discuss hackathons and sort of what they bring to ecosystems and the developer environment, the user environment. I know sort of last hackathon we had miner tooling, so providing some incentives and tooling and information education things for miners. So they're quite varied, quite varying in subjects. So let's discuss our latest hackathon, Hackathon 6.
Sure. So Hackathon 6 is about cypherpunk finance.
Yep.
Essentially trying to build on first principles. And, we're kind of moving into an era on Ergo where we have a couple of big things happening on the application layer in parallel that are DeFi primitives, right?
Yep.
Whether you get, pool to pool lending or pool to peer lending or peer to peer lending. Um, it gives people the ability to kind of take their assets, potentially collateralize them, build leverage, become liquid. I guess what's the saying? Make your money work for you,
Yeah,
right?
exactly right. That's what it all comes down to for passive income and things.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting in blockchain. Sometimes coins, I don't want to say are pet rocks, but they're kind of pet rocks. It's like put it in cold storage and just sit on it, and then the idea with kind of creating counter economic frameworks is you need actual liquidity, right? You need
yeah,
money to move. You
yeah,
need,
it's one thing I don't really sort of. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say. Let me rephrase it. On like the hodl mindset, yes, I understand it. Putting things away, it's safe and locking it away, but that's just sort of looking at things from like a fiat backed side of things, like the speculative aspect. But at the end of the day, these things are currencies. They're designed to be spent and transacted and interacting with ecosystems and not just on the application level, but like the P2P side, like you mentioned.
yeah, it's velocity, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing that it's kind of hard to determine in the crypto industry as a whole. Is it a digital asset that's more of like a store of value that you, I don't know, bury in a hole somewhere and hopefully dig up in a decade and you're in a better position, or is it more of a currency where you transact, you invest, you build business, exchange goods, services, all that good stuff. And the reality is it's kind of both. Like
Yeah.
cryptocurrencies in a way are pretty flexible assets. They're hard to define. Um,
Well,
you
on one
know,
hand, you've got the limited supply, so the hard money aspect, so the store of values perspective. But yeah, like I just mentioned as well, the like the currency aspect alongside that also.
yeah, and it's interesting when you get into like the stablecoin aspect, right?
Mhm.
Kind of get some derivative that's either algorithmically backed by a crypto asset, or sometimes we get these fiat backed coins that are usually kind of put on chain by a central custodian,
Yeah.
and they do serve a purpose. They kind of create cash like liquidity on blockchains, and that's important for decentralized finance. You have like this notion of friction, right? And if you look at it from a currency perspective, there's always friction, right? If I were to take my dollars and I were to go buy you a beer in Australia, right? I'd have to go through some sort of intermediary to exchange my, dollars to Aussie dollars, and that's not going to come with zero slippage, right? Those are floating rates that are traded every day on FX markets, and it comes with a cost. And
Yeah.
so if you look at it from like a currency perspective, kind of makes sense that there's friction, right? But then you also have a subset of users that look at it more of, I guess, a general market where, if I'm going to go onto the NASDAQ and I want to buy, a variety of securities. Okay, I do have market price that I have to kind of contend with, but that friction is a lot less because you have a base currency.
Yeah, true. Yeah, you
You
know
know,
what people were transacting with. You've got that sort of stable mindset there, and then you can build on your trades, your positions, everything like that.
and so the benefit of like centralized stable coins is you get the, I'm just going to say Nasdaq like experience where you don't have that friction versus if you get into let's say more crypto to crypto, you do get a little bit of friction. You do get a little more let's call it exchange costs. Or if I want to take my ERG and convert it to SIG USD and then buy something with SIG USD, it's like, am I converting currencies or am I working in one common market? That's not really even clear in my opinion.
Yeah, well,
Um,
depending on which route you go, there's a couple of different markets there, really. Whether you're interacting
yeah,
with the bank itself or liquidity pools on Spectrum, for instance, is it or P2P print? There's a number of different options there.
yeah, it's an interesting concept anyway to just like think about and say, okay, well, if it's more currency, right? Then okay, you have to expect some friction, but then it's a matter of saying, okay, well, how do we build businesses and make these currencies work not just on chain, but long term. It would be nice to have DAOs that had actual off chain purposes. You
Yeah.
get into decentralized communities and lending and kind of like the Ergo lend side where you could potentially build credit systems off chain and do all kinds of neat things from more the currency perspective, right? And right now, I think the mindset is a lot heavier on the market perspective. It's like, okay, if we can create one unified market to where I can take liquidity and I can go on whatever base layer, and invest as though you have kind of like multiple mirrored markets and
Yeah.
play around with assets. That's more, I would say, the common mindset. But if you look at cryptocurrency as currency, I think that if we get into the mindset that it's currency, we can build business, we can build more velocity in these systems, and actually get it off chain, make it useful beyond. I'm going to trade digital asset A for digital asset B, and that's going to go up, and then I'm going to go back to digital asset A, and then I'm going to go to fiat, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the mindset right now, rather than how do we take these and make them useful beyond number go up.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned liquidity there a couple of times, and often people sort of wouldn't say, or they probably complain a little about the lack of liquidity on Erg and sort of how thin order books and things are. There are a number of different options that people can utilize to sort of provide liquidity on centralized exchanges, dexes and things like with the grid bots and even Kushti's sort of uh, offering of the decentralized grid bots. I think that can be huge because being able to sort of instead of being locked to one centralized exchange, you arbitrage between two potentially and things like that. So yes, a couple of different ways that people can put their ERG to use and add liquidity to different exchanges.
Yeah, and when you get into lending protocols, which are just now kind of, I'm going to say burgeoning in our ecosystem, they're just starting.
Yep.
We have a couple betas, right? Those can be very big drivers for access to liquidity because there's a certain incentive of return and it's collateralized, right?
Yeah. You kind of have that little safety net there of being collateralized. So obviously liquidations occur if you can't sort of pay off on options and bonds and different time frames, etc. But yeah, I'm really excited for the DeFi lending side of the application level side of things at the moment on Ergo because it just seems like every other week now things are sort of popping up out of nowhere and like we just saw the duck pool, was it their quack paper I believe they called it, their light
Yeah, like
paper or white paper.
I have to say, I have to give respect to, Crassifus, because number one, he has a working beta, and number two, diving into that quack paper, there's something that we rarely see in this industry, and that's budgeting.
Exactly right. And having it outlined there, it's very, very refreshing.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a,
so
there's a lot where, people fundraise, but then what for?
yeah,
Where does it
like
go?
yeah, they
You
might
know?
have like their like a budget sort of thing external, but having it out in the public where people can see, they can do their own due diligence on the project itself. And one of the big things I liked actually also is like the management of the treasury and everything sort of, or the fees and revenue and all that sort of stuff going into the treasury for the public and or the token holders themselves to manage the
Mhm.
expenditures and all that sort of side of it, which is also once again sort of refreshing to see in the industry.
No, it is. I'm excited. I think he's done great work with that.
Yeah. And then that's just one option as well. So that's like sort of the pool-based lending. We've got Sigma Phi, so the bonds and everything, more sort of P2P. And what else do we have? We've got Excel, so the uncollateralized. It's things popping up out of everywhere. You name it. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, we got some options being
Oh, the
played with.
options, yeah, Sigma O,
Yeah.
sorry.
So it's kind of it's an exciting year. You have a lot of just primitives.
Yeah.
Those financial primitives, make the ecosystem more complex, offer more liquidity. In my mind, the biggest question, not just on Ergo, but kind of every blockchain in terms of, like what is really missing, it's payment rails that are,
Yeah.
take things off chain. Right now that's very centralized, let's say.
Yeah. Well, that's
And
one of
there
the
are some. Oh, go
sorry,
for it.
I was just going to say that's one of the suggestions actually for the Cypherpunk hackathon is sort of looking at those payment rails and which way like BISC like protocols and things like that. So yeah, it's something to sort of for the community to keep in the back of their mind.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. You know what? I tend to let's just say enjoy privacy oriented communities, and one community in particular I think has probably done the best job in terms of building out the P2P side would be Monero.
Yeah,
And I would say, if there's anything to learn from what that community has done, what they've built is, push things towards P2P money, right? Now, one unique thing that Ergo has is, smart contracts.
yep,
That's not something that, uh, you know, Monero's really its use case. It's more private money, right?
yep.
And with Sigma protocols, it'd be very fascinating long term to see, what those two could look like together, where you have not only private money, but you have the ability to potentially build trustless business with private money.
Yeah, well, what's one of the things actually that sort of started rattling around in my brain when I first got into Ergo, and it's how to utilize Sigma protocols and things like that. And being able to sort of lock things up on chain, potentially being able to sort of verify things off chain, that transactions, whether it's cash in hand or P2P sort of transfers and things like that, verify it, sign it off on chain, and then it just distributes funds that need to occur. So and then actually not knowing where it's come from or even potentially where it's going with stealth addresses, for instance. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of things out there that can kind of come of this sort of stuff, and a lot of things that haven't been discovered yet also.
Yeah, a lot of DeFi, unfortunately, when it takes this mentality of, I don't know, let's use the NASDAQ analogy, right? You take a centralized back stable coin and you put it in a market and you're just, kind of playing with a variety of assets. That has a high risk of regulatory capture. It has a high risk of censorship.
Yeah.
There are a lot of downsides to that model. And so, in my mind, it's an interesting thought experiment anyway. Like how can we take core principles, privacy, security, decentralization, sovereignty, right? Not the ability to not get blacklisted, um, and build a DeFi ecosystem that stands on those principles and kind of protects them. That's a hard lift. It's not something that I would say is a problem that's been solved by the industry yet, but long term, I think there's a ton of value there.
Yeah, exactly. And even looking at the way regulation could potentially, like the road it takes, I think that's sort of priceless. And the need for these services and protocols and things like that, it's they'll all come to light once potentially all these things come to light on the regulation front, because blacklisting addresses and all kinds of things, for instance, it's going to come down with a hard hammer, in my perspective, if it does come at all.
Well, it's interesting. Even then, you have a base layer that's built on kind of this ideal that market should be open.
Yeah.
Right. To where ideally blockchain doesn't care who you are. They don't care where you're from. Doesn't care what you believe. You have a set of, let's say programmed rules that the system follows, and everybody's playing the same game.
Yep.
But then when you get into the idea that, okay, well, if person A is from country A and we don't like country A, so we're going to either censor or blacklist or push their transaction down the chain, suddenly these systems aren't so fair anymore.
Well, yeah. I could go on a proper rant here about all that sort of stuff and like geo banning and IP banning and all kinds of things like that. And unfortunately, you're kind of seeing that a little bit on sort of Ethereum at the moment in regards to sort of the MetaMask perspective and then the OFAC compliance nodes and things like that. And it's a bit sad, in my opinion, that it's kind of taken that route. And I just hope they get back on track and sort of steer the ship around and then sort of head in that other direction where these systems are built for anyone to be sort of censorship resistant, the resilient platforms for anyone to be able to do sort of what they want on them.
I think there's a tremendous amount of value in that. And the reality is when you get into the NASDAQ mindset, things just trend in that direction, to where, you could use the example, like one thing I have to tip my hat to Vitalik for in the last week, because he was like, oh, we should come out with a type of stealth addresses on Ethereum.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, I can say, well, have you heard about that on Ergo? But, that aside, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have privacy tooling. But, there's been some backlash even where people say, oh, this is the wrong direction. We need institutional adoption. Therefore, we're going to, be captured by institutions, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, I've been hearing that too many years in this space. Like, oh, we're going to get government adoption. We're going to get institutional adoption. And, the reality is, I don't know why you wouldn't just have JP Morgan coin.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, why do you need a decentralized network if you're just going to censor something anyway? That's like the main benefit of the inefficiency, is that it's censorship resistant.
Yeah, exactly
So
right.
you can say, okay, well, it's distributed, but have you heard of a backup, right? You can always have a couple backups, and you still have multiple storage points for your ledger. So I mean, that is kind of, in my opinion, really the biggest benefit of these systems, is that it takes middlemen out, and it creates this potential to have global systems that are fair.
Yeah, and it kind of, I don't know, there's just what we've been touching on the last couple of minutes there, like the privacy aspects, security aspects, the centralization of things. That it just goes back to that cypherpunk mindset of sort of ensuring your privacy, the security of yourself, like your data and everything, and basically getting away from institutions, whether it be large companies, like Web2 companies, for instance, banking, governments themselves, all that sort of stuff. It's creating a counter economic tooling sort of perspective from like this cyberpunk aspect in regards to like blockchain adoption and things. I think it's the industry will have a rude shock at some point, and we'll have to sort of go back and start looking at these principles that sort of we focus on pretty greatly here at Ergo.
Well, if you're trying to build a non-fragile system, you want to avoid central points of failure. Just that simple. And there's a lot of, I don't know, I guess it's been good times, right? So having central points of failure really isn't an issue because um, crypto's kind of accepted, right? Kind of.
It's
And because it's kind of accepted, people built in ways that probably bootstrap liquidity fast and probably have a lot of vulnerabilities in terms of regulatory capture or central points of failure. And it's hard to engineer systems that don't, right? You can use the example of like, I'll just pick on, fiat-backed stablecoins, right? They can bootstrap liquidity very quickly in ecosystems.
Yep.
And that has its benefits, right? But then it also has its risks. And we have to look at both sides. I mean, I've always said, okay, it's an open ecosystem. If somebody wants to build it, they can, right? I'm not going to stop them, but I'm happy to talk about assumptions and principles and security risks, right? Because I do think that at some point that, may be a reality. It's not today, hopefully. We got what, hour and 10 minutes left. My time anyway.
Yeah.
But it's something that I think a lot of people look in the future and have an open question about.
Yeah, well, if you look at looking at sort of fiat-backed currencies, whether it's USDC or USDT on Ethereum being in a smart contract, it can be locked. And that's just looking at things on chain, but then like the regulatory risk and capture sort of ability off chain as well, sort of seizing assets, freezing them in banks, or like calling options, whether it's permissionary notes or whatever, like however it's set up. That's another sort of discussion there with not sort of being able to see in, or the transparency for like say USDT, for example. But it's looking at things both on chain and off chain in that perspective.
No, I think it's funny, like that you have a crypto ecosystem that probably the main driver of liquidity right now is central stable coins, and they're held by entities that buy U.S. bonds. So what is backing all of this, counter economic cypherpunk finance? U.S. bonds.
Yeah.
Same shit, different day, right?
Yeah. You say it like that, and it's kind of hilarious, isn't it?
It is. It's comical in a way. In a way, I think we've kind of failed, at least in trying to create resilient counter-economic systems, because look at what the main thing backing a lot of the liquidity is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of scary, isn't it? Like you say it like that, and then sort of you put things into perspective and how reliant the industry is on centralized fiat-backed stable coins. And yeah, there's a lot that could go wrong there.
Yeah, I mean, what happens if the U.S. Treasury market, it would be bad for me. I'm an American, but what would happen if one day we have an issue?
Yeah.
Maybe these fiat stablecoins are a bad idea to begin with. Maybe we should have some other store of value that's a little bit less connected to, one country's geopolitical choices and economic choices. I know that you have stable euros and, other currencies that are like a lot less popular.
Fiat based though. That's the thing. It's still the same in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, we had a couple. Gaza is a good example. He's in Ireland, and so I think he had some UST or something, or USDT, and he was saying, I've gained 30% because the euro tanked, right?
Well, even here, being an Australian, I think our exchange rate is off the top of my head, I think it's around $1.40, $1.45 thereabouts. But not too long ago, a couple of months ago, I was up around $1.65. So I was laughing. Anything
Mhm.
earned in US dollars or perspective gained in value just from not doing anything, just from the currencies like the forex sort of trading pair there.
Yeah, and maybe the dollar's the cleanest dirty shirt, right? I don't know.
Yeah,
But I'm sure, you know, taking history into account, things go the other way as well.
yep, yeah, exactly right.
Having what fiat currency hasn't failed. We have ones that haven't failed
Yeah,
yet, right? But
yeah,
if history is, rhymes at some point, maybe my lifetime, maybe not.
yep,
It'll go the other way, and so I think it's interesting to try to get away from government paper
yeah,
and try to say, okay, how can we create a more resilient store of value? That's an open question. I mean, you can look at like currency commodity baskets, or I don't know, crypto commodity baskets potentially. There's a lot of high level ideas, but then, the question is, how do you implement them, and how do you make sure they're secure, and build them to where they're non-fragile?
yeah. Well,
Hard
we've
question.
kind of got something along those lines here, and I mean, Ergo being developed with Dexy, but um, like that's been first proposed. Oh God, how long ago was that?
Hmm.
Six,
No, it's
12
been a
months
while.
ago, a long time. And so there's
Yeah.
been a lot of discussions, a lot of iterations in contracts and everything like that. And I think it was actually Alex who said that it was one of the most complex contracts on Ergo, or if not, it is the most complex contract. There's a
No,
lot of moving parts there.
I look at Dexy in a way as a type of central bank, right? And one thing central
Yeah,
banks generally do is they hold a reserve of foreign currencies. They have their own currency and they balance the float,
yep,
right? And so some people try to keep a hard peg, and I guess as we've seen in Japan, in terms of their bond market, that's
yeah,
not always easy to do. Some, I guess, float within a range. Dexy is slow, it's predictable, it's pre-programmed. So it's going to be interesting to watch the dynamics of that unfold, because you kind of take out the human risk factor, I guess. We see that in the US a lot, where we have these Fed meetings, and everyone's like sitting around waiting, see what happens, and then the world moves afterwards, right? And hopefully
yeah,
people position themselves right beforehand. But it ultimately comes down to a few people in a room making a decision that impacts everybody.
yeah. Especially from the US perspective as well, like the influence that the dollar has over world currencies and things like that. So it's not just like you being a US citizen directly influencing your everyday life, but it's a huge impact worldwide.
Yeah, cost of money.
Yep.
So
Well,
I'm quite interested to watch Dexy. It's something that I'm fully aware is experimental,
yeah,
right? And I think everybody should have that assumption in mind. It's a product that is subject to um, just human randomness, human behavior, right? That's always the hardest thing to predict.
well, exactly. Yeah,
But it
looking at
has
game
clear,
theory and everything, you could
yeah,
predict
yeah. We
99
have,
things and one thing that you miss that they pick up
yeah. I
on.
mean, we have clear risk assumptions and points of failure that we can look at and say, okay, well, how would this work? How would this not work? There's been testing done, to try to simulate pretty extreme environments or price changes, because, well, crypto is a very volatile market. Um, so when it's ready to launch, it's one of those things. Play with it and see. I would say that most DeFi in reality is pretty experimental, but that's not a very popular thing to say.
I think we sort of saw that. I think the most basic sort of lending protocols, like going back right back to sort of DeFi primitives, and like you're looking at the curves and the Aves, like the initial sort of decentralized finance lending protocols, they stood up the best out of like all the sort of the fallout of what happened over the last sort of 18 months and things, and market crashes and people paying out because obviously everything's locked on chain. So to get their liquidity back, they have to pay out the contracts and sort of honor that because code is law, basically. So
Mhm.
um, starting to sort of see those primitives come back here in Ergo and start to see those that DeFi sort of ecosystem start thriving.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch. I would say that the weird thing, I'm just going to use the word weird, in a lot of DeFi that we've seen so far, even beyond Ergo, is governance, right? Governance,
Mm.
bribery, governance, DAOs. That's something that I don't know. It's interesting, right? Like the whole bribery, curve war type mindset is it's fun to watch, but I don't know what the long term value is. That's still an open question in my mind.
Yeah. And then just sort of even on that governance side of things, which is sort of like the generosity side from the Mango protocol.
That's
Old
one
mate
that
there
got it.
getting arrested in Puerto Rico.
Yeah,
So,
profitable trading strategy. Yeah, I don't know where I sit on that, to be honest, because it's like on one hand, it let's say if you build a bridge that's beyond capacity and it falls down, you're liable,
yeah,
right? I think that's fair to say.
yeah,
If you engineer a decentralized piece of software that basically allows an exploit and it happens, who's liable? I guess in
yeah.
the bridge analogy, we can look at the people that were on the bridge as victims, right? And versus, the DeFi analogy where the guy, made a
An
couple,
idiot.
yeah, he made a lot of money. We tend to not have the same compassion, right?
Yeah, well,
But on a way, I have to say, okay, well, where's Mango's responsibility?
because you look at the protocol and a lot of the arguments around it is people, well, depending on what side of the fence you sit on and which way you look at things. And a lot of people
Hmm.
think that on one hand, the protocol allowed what, like the exploit. So it's all within the rules, like basically code is law.
Hmm.
And then everyone on the flip side of that who sort of lost money or looking at
Sure.
things from a different perspective, just think it's sort of unethical or things like that as well.
That's interesting. In my opinion, it's the most interesting part of DeFi is how a lot of the times there's no real way to, let's say, limit whale power, right? And create a more fair game for common people, right? And a lot of DeFi protocols are just whale dominated. There's no other way to put it. And it's like, okay, well, you can always have like some mint restriction, but then, okay, you can always spread your, you know, liquidity across multiple addresses. So that's a hard question to solve. I don't know the universal answer to that, but looking at a lot of DeFi exploits, or just disproportionate power, where a few really have the ability to control protocols. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And as a user, I guess we sort of drum on this week to week. The whole know your assumptions perspective is also from a user's perspective. So you go in there, you do some due diligence, and you're looking at tokenomics and team allocations and all kinds of things. So you're going in there as a little sort of plankton, and you're up against the core team who's been allocated themselves like 55% of tokens or something. Of course, they're going to have like a majority vote in regards to any governance and things like that. So yeah, that's one key sort of aspect, I guess, in regards to like the protocol's design and where tokens have been allocated in regards to the governance side of things as well.
It's an asymmetrical financial game, but most things are. The reality is most things are, right? You have information asymmetries, you have purchasing power asymmetries.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you can really remove that fully, but you know, when you're talking about protocols and exploits, it's certainly a risk factor to take into account in terms of design.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. So getting back to hackathons, what's a couple of sort of questions here. What's
Sure.
one of the favorite things that you've seen come out of an Ergo hack? And on the flip side of that, what's one thing that you'd like to see come out of one?
Oh, my favorite thing by far was Git block.
Yeah.
You know, and it's quite sad that, you know, well, I mean, I can understand it. The mining industry has to consolidate,
Yeah. In a
right?
bad way
And
at the moment, that's for sure.
yeah, it's in a bad way at the moment. It's like I don't know. Miners are freelance workers, right? And the I guess company that was hiring and paying about 95% of the profits fired everybody.
Yeah, well,
So,
that's it.
you know,
Laid off everyone.
yeah, laid off everyone. You know, and so of course now you have people that are competing to the bottom, basically.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess a lot of that has to do with where they are and what their power costs are and what their, you know, infrastructure debt or, you know, where they are in terms of paying off their rigs. And everybody's going to be in a different situation there.
Yeah.
So, you know, Get Block kind of ran into that, but from a high level, I would say that's my favorite, like, thing that came into a hackathon and converted into a project just because it was really innovative. And now looking at SNISPs or NISPs,
Yeah.
or I guess they took out the S.
Yeah. Make it a little bit easy to pronounce.
Yeah, you know, I think that's quite exciting to watch. Um, you know, those of you that don't know, Cheese and Rob, guys behind GitBlock, started basically the next iteration. So
Yeah.
pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd have to say the same as well. The whole sort of concept behind GetBlock and the smart pooling, sub pooling, for instance, also. And then sort of like just looking at it from a proof of concept perspective as well. Like I think that's well and truly proved itself that it's um, capable and doable on chain, but it's just a matter of simply adoption at that point. So unfortunately, as much information that the community sort of could push out and try and attract people to utilize that protocol, unfortunately people didn't sort of adopt it for whatever reason, which is quite unfortunate. But it is a proven concept, so hopefully it is picked up at some point. And whether that's sort of someone in the community or an existing mining pool themselves or whatever, like just to be able to create that point of difference. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. But looking at what the boys are doing now, you did mention Cheese and Rob there, and the Lithos protocol. If you want to sort of jump over there and check them out. They've got a white paper, and I believe, or at the moment, they've actually got a logo competition. So head over to ErgCube and vote on that if it's still running by the time this video is out.
Yeah, we'll see. Man, I have no skill in front end stuff, so design, it's not my forte. But I saw the logos. There was some nice looking ones there.
Yeah, there's some pretty cool ones there. And
We need to do the same with Dexy. I know we've teased about it, but we probably need to get on our cube and kind of do the same.
yeah, we'll reach out to HQ, or HQ if you're listening, mate. Reach out and we can set something up there, because there is a number of pretty cool submissions also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a couple I'd like to see. But what's one thing that you would like to see built out in the ecosystem in and of itself?
You know, there's a lot of interesting, let's say, probably the most interesting idea in terms of P2P money that I've seen in a while was the spender sign currency framework.
Oh yeah, yep,
You know, where essentially you collect signatures and everybody that kind of touches that, it's kind of like a promissory IOU or something. And
yep,
the longer the chain gets, the clearer the assumption of, its value.
Yep.
That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well,
I've always really wanted to see the Ergo Let's take off. And, it's one of those things that, okay, it's not sexy, right?
yep.
In terms of like what most users would like to see or interact with, it's something that we've kind of pushed back way too many times. But one of these days, I would love to see the community pick that up. And if not, I think eventually the Ergo Foundation will get to it. But having that start and from the community would probably be better anyway,
Yeah.
just because of how it's designed to work.
Yeah, exactly. The whole Let's thing, it's really interesting because a lot of the value is created off chain, if that makes sense as well. Like
Mhm.
having communities come together and collaboration and all kinds of bits and pieces. So it relies on or heavily relies on some sort of social aspect as well, and bringing that perspective, the off-chain social perspective, and then bringing it and combining with like blockchain and the power of blockchain and all that sort of stuff. It's really exciting looking at the potential, but like you said, it's kind of not sexy at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's weird in terms of people's perception of money, right? It's like, okay, you have a community of people that, they want to exchange, transact, kind of have each other's back. So they create a community credit system where, if you incur debt, you don't actually owe anybody but the community as a whole. So
Yep.
if I have debt to, person A, I can repay that to person C.
Yep.
The big question is, do I contribute and kind of create value or service or whatever
Yep.
with what I do in that community? It's an interesting social tool
Yeah.
that I think is pretty cool in terms of removing kind of the accounting hierarchy that can exist in those type of systems.
Yeah. And then the transmissions of, well, how do you say this? Like whether it's a good or a time or a service, like things like that, and the value, like a value unit that can be applied to all that sort of stuff. Like that's pretty interesting, also.
Yeah, it's different than how most people look at money because let's say within at least a Let's framework, there's not really scarcity.
Yeah.
It's not about competing and having like a scarce resource that you're fighting over. It's more about like collaborative exchange as a currency.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, there's a couple of nice options there for people to sort of jump on and look at. I believe, there's a couple of examples on Let's Anyway. I think from 2020 or maybe 2019, like an example contract and things like that. So a lot of work has been put into it. There's a lot of documentation there. So jump onto docs.ergo, and I think it's on GitHub also. If you want to sort of look at some background history in regards to what's previously happened there. But even the spend assigned contract, spend assigned money, that's pretty interesting also. If anyone wants to read up a little bit more about that, it's actually on the Ergo forum. There's a post up there and sort of the general outline and the perspective on how sort of things operate. But that's another interesting concept, sort of that could be built out.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, even if you look at the dollar, what's it backed by? Trust and faith,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so, if you create some kind of community money, at least you can see the people you're supposed to, trust that faith in, and you
Yeah,
interact with them, and I don't know. It's a fascinating concept. It's somewhat foreign to how most people think, just because of the monetary system we're raised in.
yeah,
But I think it has a lot of value, and the reality is, I think a lot of people, at least on like the Let's side, I do that with my friends, with my family, with people close to me. I give them my time, my service, my help, my hand, whatever, and
yep.
I don't really ask for anything back, but it tends to come, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
exactly. Even myself having a trade background, I know that all too well. Like you offer time and services, and whether it's directly related to your trade or anything like that. But it's funny how it all evens itself out, isn't it? Like no one keeps a track on things, but ultimately what goes around sort of comes around and things like that. So
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, bad actors kind of get eliminated because you realize they don't get back, right?
Yeah, very quickly.
And,
Yeah.
and that's really the only point of a Let's currency is to, it's not so much, I would say, to like monitor the people who are active. It's more to censor the people who would take advantage.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And it soon comes to light how easy it is to identify those sort of actors as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's life.
Exactly. There's always someone there looking to skip a round of drinks, or you know what I mean, like not put in the
Mhm.
hard work where it's required and things like that. So yeah, it's pretty easy to pick those ones up.
So I think there's a lot of different vectors where, the Ergo ecosystem could, do unique things on chain, off chain, in terms of building, economic tools with first principles in mind.
Yeah.
And I do think that collectively the community is smarter than me anyway. So I'm excited to see what they come up with.
Yeah, most definitely. It's one of my favorite time throughout the week is definitely the dev updates. Even these discussions, because they're so wide and varied, and we get a lot of feedback on the hash it out, and a lot of people say that we talk about things that isn't widely discussed in the industry as a whole, and it flicks on light bulbs for those guys as well, because it gets them thinking about the not so sexy side of the industry. So hopefully we sort of reach out there and sort of make those connections. And thanks for everyone sort of for providing that feedback. But yeah, it's pretty interesting to sort of watch and see it all come to light.
Yeah, the goal is just to support voluntary transactions that are backed by a, censorship resistant ledger.
Yeah.
So, if you look at it from that, you can use the ledger for a lot of things, a lot of different ways. And that kind of gives you a certain, I don't know, security assumptions in terms of truth.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of saying, okay, well, how can we take that and build systems that make it easy for voluntary exchanges, transactions to happen between people, communities that build value.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
most definitely.
sometimes crypto goes into like, it's not even the Nasdaq mentality, man. It's like the penny stock mentality,
Yeah, definitely.
and it's I don't know. I don't find that so interesting. You can always gamble on something, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's also one of the one of the suggestions actually for this hackathon, being this cypherpunk sort of mentality and things. And um like degen finance, there's always going to be that aspect, whether it's gambling like penny stocks or anything like that. So yeah, it'd be pretty interesting to see what comes of it. And yeah, sort of finalizing what I was saying previous just a couple of moments ago. Um the Ergo hack is a highlight for myself, because we often see, like, we have a theme obviously, but
Mhm.
what people can submit, it's so wide and varying, and things that often always come out of left field, and you had no recollection, or no, so what's the word I'm looking for, um, no idea that basically these things are coming, and they just pop up, and yeah, away we go. And yeah, really useful sort of protocols, perspectives, education, research papers. Like, it's so cool.
Yeah, you can't predict organic growth. That's what makes it organic.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
self-organizes without direction. Beautiful in a way.
Yep, most definitely, mate. We're coming up to time. Is there any sort of last words you want to have on anything that we've discussed today, or the hackathon concept itself?
Sure, I think that, everything starts with a good idea. Then there's a lot of people out there that may not have the skill set in terms of development, right? They may not have something that in their mind sees them as, I don't know, worthy of participating or some nonsense like that. A good idea is a good idea at the end of the day. So I would recommend everybody out there in the community that really wants to think about, what we could build, what you would use, what would we need, feel free to drop it. I think Reddit is a great spot, and just in terms of how it aggregates data.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see some community ideas pop up on there and people discuss.
Yeah, there's a number of different channels that can all occur. And yeah, if you want to register, head over to ergohack.io. There's a lot of information there, and pretty lucrative sort of prize pool as well, up around sort of 20 grand thereabouts. And if you take the ErgoPad token allocation there into account. But yeah, by all means, jump onto Reddit, ask some questions there. There's people, there's like I need a team channel in Discord itself. There's a hackathon channels as well. So you might have an idea. May not be a developer. Try and reach out to the devs. Sort of pass on your sort of concept, your proof of concept. You might have a little bit of documentation there, or just something in your head that you want to run past someone. See how feasible it is, and people might want to jump on your team just from the cool idea perspective of things.
Yep.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, thanks very much for tuning into this Hash It Out. Joe, once again, it's been a pleasure chatting, mate.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for taking the time.
No dramas, mate. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a good one.